Would you ever want to work in comics? I mean, when I say work in comics, I mean I think there's a lot of different pieces to it. There's would you like to write a story for comics? Would you like to draw comics? Would you like to kind of somehow market and maximize revenue? I mean, that doesn't sound like any fun. But why do people want to work in comics? A lot of people do. And it's one of those industries where almost everyone who's a fan of comics, who reads comics, would like to be a part of it. Why is that? And what does it take to work in comics? Hey everybody, this is Perch. Funny thing about comics, it's one of those few industries where everybody who is a big fan, who kind of reads comics and is part of comics, they want to eventually, write their own comics. They want to actually be part of the business. And if you think about it, it's like a lot of people watch football and they don't want to play football, or they play video games. They don't necessarily want to make the video games. But comics is one of those things where almost everyone who reads and collects and appreciates comics has a story in their mind. They've got something they would like to do. They have some. It's funny. I heard it once described as, if you're reading comics, it's like you're training. You're training to one day write comics. You're training to one day be a part of comics. It's this unique thing about the comic book industry where just being part of it means you're almost getting yourself ready to join it. And that, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I'm sure there's other industries that kind of work that way, but nothing as much as comics. And the reality is, most of the people who work in comics tend to have a bad experience. I'm doing these videos. I did the one on Stephen Platt. I've got a ton of others. And the bad stories outnumber the good stories. Now, I don't say it to be negative. I don't know how you could take that any way but negative, but generally speaking, yes, it sounds bad that, for most people, being in comics has a bad ending to it. But it's put a different way, it's like it's kind of a lot of people enter to be part of a dream, part of a hobby. Those things don't always work out, and in many cases, maybe you have a story or a thing you want to do. You get to do it. It maybe is not the best experience, but then you get it out of your system. You move along. You get to move on to something else. I think that working in comics is a tough one, because to be really successful at comics long term, and long term is the key, you either have to be very lucky, and that certainly has worked out for some. I think that folks like Rob Liefeld, I think is somebody who's been very lucky in comics. Now, lucky doesn't mean untalented. Lucky doesn't mean that you didn't work for it. It just means that, if Liefeld could have gone another direction. It wasn't assured that he was going to make it in comics. He certainly worked hard. He certainly, perfected his style, his craft. He knew enough about how to market himself. But it's not like Rob Liefeld went to comic book professional school. It's not like Rob Liefeld had two people who were looking out for him the entire time, helping him make sure he succeeded. There's lots of businesses, and I've told that I've done this for people, but in pharmaceutical and tech and other places where, you make friends with somebody who's at a higher level than you, and they basically shepherd and mentor and make sure that, you learn the ropes, you have the right opportunities, you have some advantages, and you make it. And not everybody gets that. Not everybody has that friend who's helping them out in the business. In fact, most people do not. And in comic books, certainly being such a network-driven industry, there are people who make friendships, make associations, but it's not quite the same. You don't have that, you have some, but you don't have that person who's going to just be at such a high level in comics that their position is just assured. And then they become kind of a kingmaker. They become somebody who just, works for you and helps you and just makes sure your career never goes off the rails. That's That's not common in comics. So a lot of it is luck. But for a few people, if you really want to make it in comics, then there's this combination of having some market savvy, having some independent wealth, where in the dry periods or in the parts where things are not going out so perfectly for you, you have the ability to kind of weather that storm, either because you have some money coming in from somewhere else or you have some money saved. It helps if you have at least one toe in another business, where if you need to kind of hold your ground, you need to do the right thing to get the right ownership or do the right things from a project standpoint. Well, you happen to have done some game art, or you happen to have done something in some other genre that allows you to pipe some money in to you, that makes it easier for you to kind of hold your own and not make bad decisions because you need the money at the time. I think that there's people who take business class, or people who had brothers or fathers or mothers or sisters or cousins or friends or whoever else that were financially minded, that can say, hey, let me look over that contract for you. Hey, let me tell you how to invest that money. Hey, here's why you should start putting some cash into a 401k. Hey, here's why insurance is a good idea. And even though you don't think you're going to get sick, you might get sick. So maybe you should kind of do this. I mean, there's a lot of people who give advice like that. And I'm always surprised. Sometimes I've given advice on this channel or to other places, like, here's how it should. I did the videos about a contract. And what surprised me is the number of people of names you would recognize, and not like names you would recognize from the last year who are fairly new to comics, but names that have been in comics for 15 years. Or like, oh, thank you for explaining what an NDA is and what an MSA is. I never really understood that. Thank you. I can't post online because people will think that I'm Comicsgate if I reply to you. But thank you. It's like, gee whiz, thanks. Thanks for that compliment. But it is amazing to me how many people who are veterans, and I would consider somebody who's been in comics for more than 10 years. I think you can call yourself a veteran at that point. If you're a veteran of this industry, how many people do not know this stuff? And then there's other people who are relatively new who consider themselves still trying to figure it out. And they'll I'll have conversations with them, and they'll say things like, hey, I'm interested to learn. Hey, here's something new. This is cool. But their instincts, they're like, hey, I think this is what we should do from a business perspective. Hey, I think this is how the comic should run. And it's like, you're already talking like somebody who has way more experience with business in this industry than somebody who's been writing comics for 25, 30 years. And those people are going to be the people who succeed. Now, not always in comics, although often it will work in comics, but sometimes these people figure out ways to make money inside of comics and make money elsewhere. But if you are listening to this now and you'd say, I'd like to be part of that comic industry, I want to have a piece of it, I want to contribute to it, this is the hobby, the industry, whatever it is that I love, and I want to play in it, that's fine. And I think that's admirable and fun and good, and I hope you can, and I want you to. I think there's a couple key things that you need to do. Number one, you need to master patience. You need to be able to be patient enough to have your idea, gel and kind of formulate and be structured. That doesn't come overnight. Two, I think you need to have some business savvy. I think you need to watch some of those videos on how to run a successful business. I think you need to understand what it takes to market your comic, like we've talked about before. And number three, I think you need to be skeptical. And what I mean by skeptical is, obviously the comic industry is a small place. There's a lot of networking that goes on. There's a lot of kind of small groups and different cliques that get established, and you need to be able to kind of play and navigate those well. But you need to be skeptical of what you're told. And every now and then people who I talk to, email or over the phone or whatever it happens to be, I often say this, and if I haven't said this to you, I apologize. I mean it. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, there's somebody who's getting too close to me in their car. If there's if I haven't said this to you, it's just an oversight on my part. And that is, whatever I say, whatever advice I give, I hope that you're going and getting a second opinion. You're not going to offend me. You'll never offend me. In fact, some people will say they'll I know because they'll ask a friend of mine the same question, like, "Hey, I'm wanting to validate something that Perch said," and they're like, oh, "Don't tell him because I don't want to offend him." You're never offending me. In fact, kind of the opposite. I hope you're taking things I say and you are not believing them. You're taking them as data, and your goal should be to go out and to validate that data. I think anybody who's online on YouTube, anybody who's throwing out advice, telling you how it is, telling you if a comic is good or bad or whatever else, I think that, here's what I ask of you, the person listening right now. Don't believe me. Take what I say as a data point and then go figure out for yourself if that is right or wrong. Because some of the things I say are going to be absolutely wrong for you as a consumer, as a reader, as a worker, as whatever you happen to be. You should make sure that my advice, the comments I make, are suggestions to you. When I'd say, hey, here's a way to break into the comic industry, you should try this, this, and this, take it as a idea, not as a fact, not as gospel. I do not need people coming around saying, I trust everything you say. I don't want that kind of following or group. I don't. I want you more than anything else, and this is what's key to be successful in any business, let alone comics. You have to have the ability to go and, second source, validate what you're hearing to formulate an opinion. If you just take what people tell you as the truth and you run with it, whoever that person might be, you're setting yourself up for some major, major failures and some real problems. Be careful of what people tell you. Sometimes people tell you things and they're telling you honestly. It's not that they're lying to you. It's just sometimes things work for one person and not for the other. By questioning, by really understanding what works for you, that's how you're going to be successful. Comics, the biggest piece of advice I've given before, I know, is the best way to break into comics, be part of this comic industry, is to just begin. Make your comic. Just start. You will learn a lot from succeeding or failing, and chances are you will fail. But that's okay. There's different types of failure. There's trying something and it doesn't land, and then there's trying nothing at all. And in my mind, trying nothing at all is failure. Comics is a really special industry. It's a place where we all play, and everybody who reads a comic, like I said, wants to be part of it somehow. And by the way, if you're a creator or you're somebody in the big two or three or four or a publisher or whatever, you've made it, right? You're doing comics. Your name has been on a book. You've made some money, and that's awesome. One thing to keep in mind as you're seeing fans kind of say crazy things, do crazy things, keep in mind this one fact. Almost everyone you're interacting with wants to be where you are. They want to be part of it too. And if you remember that that's where a lot of the joy and the criticism and the craziness all comes from. It comes from a desire to be part of your club. It helps. It helps you relate to them. It helps you help them. It helps you see them not as some crazy asshole on the side bothering you, but as somebody who just wants to be part of what you're doing. And no, not everybody belongs in it. Not everybody is able to make it. But the more you can realize that the people who are talking to you, all they really want is to be part of the party. And, that's kind of cool. That most businesses do not say. Nobody's going to, the guys who are selling insurance and, begging to be part of that business. Comics hold a special place, and that's why people are often the way they are. What do you think? How would you suggest people get into the comic industry? What advice would you give? What would you tell them? Leave a comment below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notification. Most importantly, for those of you who listen to the end, I don't think many do, but hey, maybe you do. Thanks for listening.